Okay, everyone, welcome back to our month of October. It is October. Anyway, we are supposed to be doing our non-farm payroll, but as most of you probably know, the U.S. government shutdown has probably kind of delayed the whole thing, and we are likely not getting the NFE. Now, we'll still go through the theory first for tonight, and we'll take a look at the markets in terms of what we can prepare. Also, just to give you, just to get you guys up to speed on what's really going on. The data itself is actually ready. It's just pending releases, so we don't know if we're gonna get a stealth release or anything like that. Never know with Trump at this point in time. But yeah, so here we are. This is going to be our weirdest non-farm payroll in quite a while. In fact, the situation here, it's actually really, really weird. The last time we had this kind of situation was basically back in 2019, 2018. 2019, 2018, yeah, it was a very long time ago. But yeah, anyway, my name is Virenjara. Let's get it started with a disclaimer. Any opinion discussed in this webinar or link to this presentation is provided as a general market commentary and does not constitute investment advice. News trading involves risk due to high volatility. Market reactions to news can be very swift and unpredictable, which leads to higher trading risks and delays in order execution. So be very attentive when determining the volume of transactions and consider all possible risk factors. All right, just give me 1 second. Okay. So, yeah, as per usual, I'm going to show you the bonus for participants. That would be the promo code to use to double the deposit bonus, and you should already have access to the private Telegram channel as well if you have attended our sessions before. So yeah, if not, if you registered through the website for this webinar, you should get that on your email. If you still are not part of the Telegram channel, or if you didn't register, then please feel free to contact Octa and they'll give you the access to the link. All right, so this is the code. It's Nonfarm 2025, so feel free to use the code. It is a one-time use code, so make sure you use the code at the right time when you're depositing into Octa trading accounts. It is still valid until the 31st of December 2025, so you have about 3 months to use the code. All right. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Virenjara, and I've been a full-time trader with over 20 years of experience. I started, trading basically in 2002. It's not, yeah, 2002. That's super long ago, right? So right now, officially, it's been 23 years. But yeah, I've been a professional trading coach as well and technical analyst since 2007, working in the industry, in Australia, in the US, as well as and in Japan. My expertise is in the Ichimoku Kinko Hyo technique. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to check out our previous videos on the Japanese charting techniques. I think it should be there on the channel there. Okay, and I've also been invited as a guest speaker at Trading Investing Expos, Invest Fair in Singapore, as well as the ATA and the APTA conferences, which is the Australian Technical Analyst Associations. All right. Cool. So yeah, we'll go through some of the theories first in terms of what is it that we're looking at and who is collecting all this data. And obviously, center of all of this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So basically, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's the federal agency in the U.S. that collects and disseminates various data about the U.S. economy, as well as the labor market. And their reports includes the CPI, the PPI, which hopefully, if there are no delays, we're going to get them on the 14th. But looking at the shutdown here, if we talk about the outlook this week, I'd say the shutdown shouldn't be that long, but it's a little bit weird, and I'll talk to you guys about the shutdown this time around. It's actually very different. All right, so yeah, that's the BLS. And if you have been following the news, or if you haven't been following the news, then let me explain a little bit about what's going on with the BLS. So obviously, with a lot of the government jobs cuts that Trump has been doing with Doge, we kind of suspect that the Bureau of Labor Statistics might be collecting data in a weird way where it's actually, I think there's a lot more inaccuracy, and that's basically what we have seen in 2025. There's a lot of revisions with the data that has been released by the BLS, and in particular the labor data itself. Now, we'll explain a little bit in terms of how this labor data is actually collected, and if you take a look at the theory part, then you'll understand why it's actually not a very accurate representation, and that's probably why we are getting a lot of the revisions that's ongoing right now. Now, if we take a look at the labor numbers, it's not just the non-farm payroll tonight. We have the unemployment rate as well, but the non-farm payroll, it's basically something that a lot of people actually look at. Okay. Now, the BLS, it's currently without a head, right? So it doesn't have, the chief of BLS or head of BLS, it's non-existent. Okay, so we basically have one that was fired. Was it a month ago? Was it 2 months ago? But basically, Trump fires the head of BLS, and I think this week he nominated someone to take over the BLS, but within hours, I think we are looking at a lot of pushbacks from the market as well from the government side. And turns out that the guy that supposed to head the BLS, it's kind of an extremist in terms of being more of a right-wing political extremist. Does a lot of negative stuff, right, in terms of harassing Kamala Harris and whatnot. So yeah, it's currently without leadership per se. So I wouldn't trust a lot of this data is coming out here, but unfortunately, it's not just the labor numbers that we are looking at the BLS to collect for. A lot of the economic data are basically collected by the BLS, and in terms of what the FOMC is looking at, it's basically the data that has been provided by the BLS themselves, which is the CPI, PPI, PCE numbers, right? Anyway, with the BLS, it's not really an excuse. I know today is really weird. And I can assure you that we're not going to be experiencing this kind of, disturbances going forward. It would be a kind of a one-off thing, right? In terms of the government shutdown that has affected the NFP numbers, we had one in this January 2019. That was a very long time ago. If you take a look at how long that date is, it's basically nearly 6 years, right? So, Omoyele is asking if there's NFP numbers we don't know. As I said at the very beginning, the logic is that we're not expecting a number, and I don't think we're going to be getting a surprise stealth release or anything like that. The thing is, if CNN leak was true, then they have information that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has actually completed the NFP numbers. Okay, so we had a choice if we want to do our theory sessions tonight, or if we're going to continue with the NFP numbers. But we're going to continue with the NFP numbers. Considering that how random stuff has been with Trump, there's still one guy working at the BLS, with all this government shutdown, and Trump might just say, hey, you know what, pull the trigger, release the numbers. I don't know, right? The numbers is out, but the whole shutdown right now is actually very different, and I'll explain to you later on once we go through some of the theories. But you really want to stick. You want to stay here, and you want to listen to how I explain the whole thing with how weird the government shutdown is right now. In fact, there's even a guy that has actually been kind of put on the pedestal there in terms of being the whole mastermind of the current government shutdown. Okay. But anyway, going back to the BLS, they released their schedule for the whole year. And, we are anticipating that NFP numbers, pending no government shutdown, is supposed to be released in the next 20 minutes, 19 minutes or so. But all these dates, it's actually published at the very start of the year, every year. So you can actually go to the BLS and you can actually go to the calendar and take a look at that, right? So in fact, I can go right now to the BLS website. Hopefully it's not down. Good, it's not down. And if we take a look at the scheduled release, it's still today in terms of the NFP numbers. There are talks about these numbers being released next Friday. These are the rumors circulating in the market right now that the number could actually be released on the 10th if it's not released today. But so far, we haven't got the green light on that. The government shutdown is still ongoing. I don't think that anything is going to get resolved today. But yeah, if they reopen on Monday, then we might actually get the NFP numbers on the 10th of October if they didn't release it today. But we're just here on standby because, as I said, Trump is being so random right now and the data is ready. They might actually release the data. So something to keep an eye out for. All right. So if you guys are new and you guys are wondering what is the NFP numbers, this is a number that's actually released every month by the BLS. It's basically measuring the number of jobs added or lost in the US economy, excluding farm-related jobs, private household employment, as well as non-profit organizations. Now, on a normal market condition, we kind of have a little bit of a benchmark at 200,000. I never trusted the 200,000. If you go through every month when we do our NFP sessions the past 3 years right now, I never trusted this 200,000 because you can't look at it on a 200,000 basis that every month it's going to be above or below 200,000 and we act on it. NFP is a little bit different because you have to understand the context that of the whole economic condition when it is actually released. Now, if you take a look at the movement in the market yesterday on Friday, why does the market react a lot to the ADP numbers? Because everyone is saying, okay, you know what? If the government is not releasing their NFP numbers, then ADP, which is a private company, is releasing their NFP numbers, and that would normally be a secondary numbers that a lot of people actually don't care. But since traders just doesn't have anything to go with, that's the reason why the ADP on Wednesday was causing a lot of major movements in the market. And the ADP number, as I said, it's different, right? It's privately collected. It's not really comprehensive, right? If someone doesn't use the ADP payroll system, then obviously that company is not going to be part of the NFP numbers. And I think that's kind of the weakness that we have to take a look at on the ADP numbers. Now, with the ADP though, if we take a look at what's going on, because it looks at the private sector, And a lot of major companies use ADP, right? When I was working in the industry, who pays for my wages and whatnot is the ADP. So that I'm actually on the ADP payroll. So yeah, I was part of that number at one stage, right? But the private sector, if we take a look at the ADP and FE, and we'll call it the private sector, then it's a huge negative in terms of the number that was actually released. In terms of the numbers, if I get it right, I believe it was minus 33, so minus 32,000, right? Forecast was for a gain of 52,000. We actually went negative 32,000, so that's actually 32,000 jobs lost in the private sector. So that was the ADP numbers. Now, NFE, obviously, it's a completely different thing because, with the NFE number that's actually released by the BLS, part of it is the government jobs. And because of the shutdown, and why I say the shutdown is unique, and you need to listen to this, because the current shutdown, we have a little bit of a suspicion in terms of how it is actually going to work on Monday. There was actually leaked documents in terms of what happened before the shutdown, that Trump's administration has actually been sending an email to all the federal agencies, including the BLS, you want to call it the FBI, CIA, Homeland Security, and whatnot, that, yeah, look, if the Democrats are not going to be passing the bill, if they resist what we want, you're going to lose the job. And the reason why this is actually very different is that this is not just a furlough. It's not really just a temporary suspension until the government opens. This time around, with the shutdown, the US government is actually going to start firing people permanently. And as I said, the whole thing is actually designed by someone, if you want to look it up. But yeah, this is actually intentional shutdown at this point in time. So is it ethical? Probably not, but it is what it is. We have Trump right now. But yeah, that's the NFP numbers. This is actually very important because, again, this is a separate number from the unemployment rate, and the way this is actually collected is actually based on surveys as well. And I think a lot more people are actually going to be responding to the surveys. This number is actually more accurate to give a perspective on the state of the unemployment rate compared to the unemployment rate itself. I'll explain to you later on when we talk about the unemployment rate. So yeah, because this is huge, right? And a lot of traders are going to be looking at this. It does have a huge impact onto the major currencies. Anything that has USD in it, the Euro USD, Sterling, Aussie, New Zealand USD, dollar Canadian, dollar Swiss, dollar CAD, they obviously creates a lot of volatility in response to the reports released if it somehow misses the consensus or if it gives us a little bit of a surprise. Now, with the BLS, the NFP, why is it so important? Because if we take a look at the classification itself, because it's non-farm, it basically accounts for 80% of the US business sectors contributing to the GDP numbers. So if we have a huge drop in people working, obviously the GDP numbers are actually going to be a little bit lower. Now, this is where we are looking at the two different datas. This is basically what causes a paradox, because we're looking at a labor market and it looks weak, right? It looks unstable. The data has been coming out. It's not been great. And at the same time, if we take a look at the GDP numbers, the final GDP numbers that was actually released last week, it was actually a very good surprise to the upside, which is at 3.8% growth, which is higher than the preliminary number of 3.3%. And this is the reason why the FOMC is kind of hesitant in terms of whether or not it should be cutting interest rates, because the data from the BLS has been so inconsistent that we don't even know which data is actually correct, right? Because on one side, the BLS is reporting that the labor market is not doing that great. But if we take a look at the inflationary reports that it's released by them, which is the CPI, PPI, and the PCE numbers, we're looking at inflation's going up. We're looking at people earning more. We're looking at people spending more. So, all this comes from one source, and we just don't know which one is actually going to be true. Obviously, I have my doubts with the labor numbers, because the NFP numbers with the BLS messed up. The stuff that they stuff up with was basically they're getting the surveys late, but then publishing the reports early before they get the whole surveys. I don't know why they're doing that. Could be intentional, I don't know. But yeah, number hasn't been that great. The other set of data is the unemployment rate. And the unemployment rate is calculated in percentage, and it is published at the same time by the NFP, with the NFP numbers by the BLS as well. Now, this one here, if you take a look at how the sampling data is collected, point number 3, the US unemployment rate is determined through a survey of approximately 60,000 households, which is really small, right? It is a very small sample size to kind of account for the whole of the USA. Now, obviously, the government shutdown, we didn't get that weekly unemployment claims, but last week's weekly unemployment claims was actually positive. It was actually lower. So we could actually get a surprise numbers here where the labor market is actually not doing that bad. And the reason why we look at the weekly unemployment claims is because for you to be part of the 60,000 on the survey, they have to be without a job. They have to be actively looking for a job in the past 4 weeks. They have to be available to start a job if offered one. This 3 points means that anyone that becomes a number in the survey has to be registered for an unemployment benefit claims, right? If they're not registered through the system, I don't know what it's called in the US, but in Australia we call them Centrelink. If you're not part of the system, then you're not going to be part of that 60,000. So this is the link between how we actually collect our consensus and try to predict and pinpoint whether or not we're actually going to get a surprise to the upside in terms of the unemployment, the labor numbers, right? But yeah, the unemployment rate, because the sampling size is constant at 60,000, this one is basically a lot more predictable, right? Because if we take a look at the sampling size, which is really small, 60,000, it doesn't actually paint the whole picture in terms of the state of the labor market in the US. And that's why I say, last month and whatnot, the NFP numbers can be fluctuating up and down, but the unemployment rate, if you take a look at it, is actually pretty stable at 4.2, 4.3%. So we're not looking at a lot of changes in terms of the unemployment rate for that one reason, okay? Yeah, NFP will be released on time. We don't know yet. If the government hasn't opened on the 10th, then we might get that on the 17th. We might get that on the 24th. We might get that on the same day when the government opens. The data is completed. That's the thing. Are we expecting a number? No. As I said, at the very beginning of the session, we're not supposed to be getting that numbers. In fact, I gave that warning on the Outlook on Monday. So if you guys have been watching that Outlook on Monday, I said if the government shuts down, you're not going to be getting your NFP numbers. So yeah, I know the NFP number is not going to be released. It's not supposed to be scheduled to be released today. So are we going to get it on the 10th? Maybe. If the government opens on Tuesday and the BLS says, you know what, the data is ready, we're just going to release it on Wednesday, they can do that. We just don't have a set date at this point in time. Okay, so people on the streets are basically talking about on the 10th, but we actually don't have confirmations on that. All right. Anyway, in 6 minutes time, we'll find out if the data is actually going to be released. But yeah, the other thing that we're looking at is the US average hourly earnings. This is actually pointing more towards inflationary pressure. This one here is actually more concise. And there's a good reason to look at this right now, because the data collected through this, it encompasses both full-time and part-time employees. So this is actually very important. It also includes overtime earnings, okay? The reason why we look at these numbers is because if the average hourly earnings goes up, then the personal income is going to go up. People are getting paid more. If they do get paid more, that could lead to inflationary pressures, because the logic here is that if you're earning more, and this is just human nature, that if you earn more, you'll have that tendency to actually spend more, right? And That's basically what we're looking at. So if the numbers of people are not working goes up, but if the average hourly earnings doubles, obviously those people that are not working probably not going to be spending, but people that are working, they're going to be spending probably a lot more than what they usually do. So this is really more inflationary rather than whether or not the labor numbers, the labor market is actually very healthy. Okay, so we got about 5 minutes. I'm not in a rush to set up my positions at this point in time. So we can take our time and finally explain a couple of non-farm trading strategies. You can do this pre-NFP. This is basically when people start pricing in or try to kind of predict or speculate on the NFP numbers. They would open the positions before the NFP numbers actually release. So just give you a little bit of an insight. What are we expecting tonight? We're expecting 52,000 from 22,000 last month. So we're expecting a gain in the NFP numbers. So if people are expecting that gain in the NFP numbers, then logically, without the shutdown, people are likely going to be, pushing the dollar up. But because of the government shutdown and the consideration that the government shutdown could lead to a permanent layoff amongst government jobs, then yeah, people are expecting the labor numbers. They don't care about what it is right now. They're likely going to be looking at a higher negative in terms of the labor numbers next month, right? Because it's going to get reported next month if that happens. And also, a lot more people are actually starting to price in for a more aggressive rate cut from the FOMC, which I'm not doing it because we saw this mentality from last year. And look at what happened with the FOMC. They basically remains hawkish and they're not cutting aggressively until last month. So yeah, we have our economic projections from them. So we're just going to stick to that. Okay. So that's pre-NFP trading. And if we traded live tonight, then we would actually use a straddle strategy, which would involve placing two pending orders, which is a buy stop and a sell stop above and below the current market price just before the NFP release. That way you can potentially profit from a strong price movement in either direction once the data is actually released. Now, once one of the orders is actually triggered, you have to immediately cancel the other order to avoid being exposed to further market fluctuations. We will cover this in our theory sessions, and that was supposed to be scheduled on the 10th. So if we don't get the NFP today, we might have to do the NFP during our theory sessions, okay? So if you are curious about what the straddle strategy is, I would recommend that you watch last month's theory sessions. If not, you can ask questions here tonight and we'll try to answer that if we don't have the NFP numbers being released. Can you discuss gold and Nasdaq? Yes, I'll do that once we go through the theory and if we don't have the NFP numbers being released in 2 minutes time, okay? All right. Usually if the NFP numbers release, we get one initial push in one direction and about 90% of the time it actually kind of come back to the original range. Now this is basically, there's actually a strategy to trade this and we would actually call it the fade, right? So we can fade the initial move because the initial market reaction typically pushes the market in one direction, market comes back to correct itself, once the dust has settled, and typically within the first 15 minutes after the data is actually released. People that trade NFP, people that trade news, they were there for the short term, really, really short term. It's borderline scalping, and they don't overstay. We get in, we get out, and that's what happens, right? We see one push in one direction, and people start taking their profits, or their stop loss getting hit, and market kind of just revert back to the original range. And then in the long run, from that level onwards, it's just going to pick up. But we typically get that whipsaw, and we basically want to trade or fade that whipsaw. Okay, it's not going to work all the time, and it's actually very rare that we actually get to trade the fade this year. I think we only did it once this year in the past 9 months. We only did it once. Okay, The other thing is obviously you can wait for NFP numbers to be released and you can trade it. I'm not looking at, let me just go back to the chart here, but in all honesty, I'm not getting any releases at this point in time. So yeah, we don't have it. I don't think this is actually gonna get released, but yeah, we'll just be on the standby here. Not expecting a lot of price movement. Oh yeah, if the U.S. government opens next week, is it going to be hectic? Of course, it's going to be hectic. The only concern that I have is if the shutdown is actually longer, because under Trump, what happens under Trump last time was basically the last shutdown, right? And sorry, I'm just waiting. I'm just looking at because all this news sites. I'm just waiting on it on the wire as well, but I'm not getting anything. We're probably not going to be getting the NFP numbers. Then I'll just wait for a minute or so, and yeah, nothing, right? So I think we can move on. Oh, hold on, starting to move. Was it leak? Let's give me 1 second. Yeah, it should have been released by now, so I can assure you that the number is not going to be released anyway. Back to this, right? So yeah, point number 4, you can trade post NFE if the numbers release. You don't really like the risk, it's fine. And personally, I don't trade much in terms of the NFP. I mean, if I trade, I wouldn't do a huge trade or anything like that on the NFP numbers. I'm more post NFE guy. In fact, post NFE doesn't mean I actually open a position on Friday. If you guys know me long enough, I actually don't like opening a position on a Friday, right? In fact, I have a very strict rule that if I don't need to, I don't open the position on a Monday and I don't open the position on a Friday. That's more behavioral. So it's really more of a habit and, tracking my trading journal and whatnot. But hey, it's up to everyone's taste. But yeah, a lot of traders, we actually look at the initial reaction. We look at Friday's close and, compile all we have over the weekend, just to prepare when the Asian market kicks off, see what the reaction is, and then we'll trade after the Asian market opens. But yeah, that would be the post NFE trade. So it's really up to you guys. So you can actually trade it before, you can trade it during, you can trade it immediately after, which is the fade, or you can just wait until everything is clear, until all that whipsaw is gone, all that volatility is gone, then you trade it. It's up to you, because in terms of the volatility, I think it falls to everyone's risk profile. If you are not a risk taker, then no, you don't actually have to trade in the noise. Just wait until all that volatility goes away, because there are risks involved inside that volatility. Sometimes you don't get filled. Sometimes the spread gets wider. It just costs a lot more. Sometimes you can open the position, but you can't close the position. Sometimes you can't do either until a while, because it depends on the liquidity when the numbers actually release, and in terms of what people are actually going to be doing. All right, but yeah, regardless of whatever strategies you want to do, you have to manage your risk. So you have to use appropriate stop loss orders. Again, never risk more than a small percentage of trading capital on a single trade, especially on the NFP trade. And you have to be informed at all times. If you are not keeping an eye out on the whole government shutdown thing, and if no one tells you that if the government shuts down that we're not going to be getting the NFE numbers, I know a lot of you guys are here knowing that the NFE is not going to be released, so I think that's something good, right? But there's a lot of traders out there, especially news traders out there, that don't have a clue, and they're probably looking at the economic calendars right now, and they say, hey, you know what, it's time, what's happening? No data is actually released and stuff like that, and, a lot of weird stuff. But yeah, you have to understand what's actually going on, what's the market sentiment leading up to the FB release. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to make that informed trading decisions. Okay, so there's another thing that you have to be flexible as well. So you have to be prepared to adapt your strategy on the actual NFE numbers and the market reaction to it. So what does that mean if we say that if the NFE numbers, it's higher than the market consensus. If you already made a plan for a lower NFP, for example, then you have to make that decision that, okay, it's not going to work out because the data is actually very different to what my initial strategy is. So that's something that you have to consider, okay? All right. So let me check very quickly if it's scheduled for anywhere next week in terms of the numbers. You know, we also have the FOMC minutes being released next week as well. I think the FOMC is still going to go ahead and publish their minutes here, but you know, because they are still a government agency and a government shutdown happens, I'm not sure if they're actually allowed to actually release their statement. I know next week is actually going to be a huge week. I think there's a lot of Fed speakers on the table here. But yeah, right now the unemployment number, the labor numbers, it's currently on schedule. It's not scheduled on the 10th either. And if we take a look at the BLS side, this is not going to be updated. So I'm not going to get anything. So yeah, 10th, it's just a maybe. It's not a confirmation. Okay, just keep you guys in mind. Yeah, I do know that there is no NFE. Yeah, that's what I've been saying the whole time, right? And I warned you guys on Monday as well. So we don't have it, and there's no schedule right now. People are saying 10th. We're not gonna get it on the 10th either. So we'll keep you guys posted. So make sure you're on the Telegram channel. I'm pretty sure the team's is gonna post stuff there. But if you guys are on the Indonesian channel, then I'll give you guys an update onto what's going on in terms of what we have, okay? But right now, we're just not going to get anything. If we take a look at the market reaction here, it's just flat, right? So, you know, nothing. Jobs reported, obviously delayed, and we got nothing. Market is just super flat at this point in time. So I'll take a look at the market here right now, but you know, if you guys want to know what the number is supposed to be, it is supposed to be a NFE at about 50,000 to 52,000. And if you take a look at the unemployment rate, it's supposed to be stable at 4.3%. I have no doubt with the unemployment rate, it's likely going to be stable at 4.3%. The average hourly earnings is likely going to go up, maybe back to 0.4%. I'm not on the cam where it's actually 0.3%, considering the PCE that we had, the personal income actually goes up. So average hourly earnings year on year is at 3.7%. It's just flat. Nothing much has changed. Okay, so those are the expected numbers. And if we take a look at the participation rate here, it is going to be at about 62.3. Again, it is unchanged. It's not a good participation rate. It is a pretty low number in terms of the survey coming in, right? And last month we talked about the numbers being bad, but it's okay. It's not supposed to be super bad or anything like that, because we look at the breakdown there and we want to look at the medical employment. So anyone that's employed in the health sector, that's actually more important, right? But yeah, if we have a negative on the private sector, not too surprised. I think a lot of private companies are laying a lot of employees. And you know, if you haven't been following what's going on, obviously Starbucks just shuttered 400 stores in the US. It's not a huge number. It's huge. I mean, 400 stores in a single week. I think that's huge, right? People are only getting 2 days notice before they get fired and whatnot. I think it's a sad story for Starbucks. But 400 stores, from a business perspective, is actually really small, because they're looking at just 1% of their total stores worldwide that they're cutting off. Okay, and it's not just Starbucks. There's a lot of F&B businesses. If you're from Singapore or if you live in the Southeast Asia region, then you do know that recently in Singapore, I think there's a lot of F&B that was shut down. If you like your boba drinks, you know, a couple of big names in the boba industries are actually closing up shops as well. So this is not isolated to just Starbucks or anything like that. But yeah, you know, if we take a look at Starbucks as an example, then yeah, obviously the private sector is gonna take a hit on that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens here. Okay. Anyway, back to the charts. You want to talk about the election? Oh yeah. If you're not sure, when I'll explain to you guys in a bit once we take a look at the dollar yen. But I think Five Solas is actually requesting for gold, a discussion on gold, as well as on Nasdaq, and I'll explain a little bit on that, and then we'll go on to all the other currencies. If you guys have any requests, we'll just turn this into a market outlook sessions, right? But anyway, for gold, I don't have anything new. It's just I'll be honest with you guys. If anyone asks me again or tells me that they're short gold, I'm not giving advice, but that's digging your own grave at this point in time. If you take a look at the offer that Israel and the US has offered to Hamas, and Hamas basically just rejected it. And after all the other Muslim nations are basically telling Hamas, just take the deal, you're not going to get anything out of it, they still rejected it. So I do expect stuff to happen tomorrow and Sunday over there in Gaza. I think that's just kind of a given at this point in time, because it's kind of like the final offer or final threat or whatever you want to call it, right? But yeah, things are going to happen over the weekend. So I don't think right now on a Friday that you should even consider shorting gold, right? And again, is it a good idea to buy it? As it is never a good idea. If you miss it, I would say, you know what, forget about it. You miss a train, it's completely fine. Don't quite care, because right now if you try to buy it and if the whole thing just revert on profit taking, you might survive, okay, if you have a lot of equities and you are not over leveraged in terms of your position size. But if you try to go all in and you don't have the room for the market to go back down to 3,600, you wipe. Pretty much instant wipeout, right? So it depends. It depends on how you manage your positions. I don't know, and I can't judge on your money management. I don't know how you're gonna take a look at it from a risk management perspective. But is it a level where it's a good level to go in long? No. Is it a good level to go in short? No. Right? Because it's not supportive. The macros are not supportive on a short with gold at this point in time. So Fed is going to be cutting interest rates. I think there's a lot more pressure on Fed cutting interest rates. Labor market in the US is not doing that well. So that would put more pressure for the Fed to start cutting rates a little bit more aggressively. I know end of the month we're going to get a rate cut. And I think it's really, I don't like to use the word, but this one is actually really stupid that people say, oh, it's 98% that they're going to be cutting rates. It's basically 100% they're going to be cutting rates. And they've already mentioned that on their economic projections for the quarter anyway. So we are going to get a rate cut. And you know what's stupid with the market? They're going to start pricing in for a 50 basis points cut, end of the month, which I think it's probably not impossible. But unlikely, right? I would say 25. But trust me on this, you're going to read on the news next week that people are actually starting, market is starting to price in 50 basis points cut instead of a 25 basis points cut because of the extended shutdown, blah, 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 blah. You'll see that. And that's going to drive gold up. And if something happens in Gaza over the weekend, which I think at this point in time, we are probably 80% probable that we are going to see something, that's going to push gold up on Monday. But again, what if nothing happens? Okay? What if people start taking profits at 4,000 at this point in time? You're probably not going to be able to react to that. What if the market gaps up to 4,000 on Monday, right? And a lot of orders get filled when the market opens. It's actually just going to tank down. We don't know. So at this point in time, if you want to trade gold, I would say if you have a position in gold, manage that position well. But if you're looking for a new position in gold because you missed a train and you feel left out, I don't think that's a good idea. And if you try shorting gold, that's just crazy at this point in time. Okay, but right now we are at an all-time high. Yesterday, if you take a look at what's the reaction there, we're not pushing any higher. So right now 3,900 is still capping it, but we're so close to 4,000. I would just say market's just gonna jab 4,000 before they start taking their profits out of it, right? Because people that went long from 3,500 will say, okay, $500 is a good number to get out. I don't like 400, I like 500. We'll get out at 4,000. So the 4,000 level is going to be a level that we are keeping an eye out for, because we are likely going to get a spike through and then immediately selling off at 4,000. Now, whether or not that's going to create a deep enough correction, I don't know. Really depends on whether or not the safe haven demand is still high. Okay. All right, you can talk about silver. Is it possible to break 48 now? Silver at 48, I'm not quite sure, but again, I'm not really focused on the 48 numbers. I'm more focused on the 50 level. So if you're thinking 4,000 on gold, then I'm looking at 50 for silver. Okay. All right. Nasdaq. Someone's asking to look at Nasdaq. Nasdaq's an all-time high right now in terms of the futures. Again, you can take a look at what pops up here. It's up because rate cut hopes is driving momentum. So this is the market being stupid again. They're likely going to be pricing in a 50 basis points cut. But in terms of how far it can go from a technical level, projections does point to about 26,000 before we see exhaustion in the market. We are not looking at any exhaustion from the oscillators. The stochastics maintain a position above 80. It's not coming below that 80 level. So it's not overbought. The RSI is still very, very high. And it's also above 70. It's not ticking back down below 70. So it's not indicative of anything. But again, one of the biggest risks with the NASDAQ, the tech sectors, is a ticking time bomb as it is. I'm not saying it's going to explode this month. I'm not saying it's going to explode this week. It will explode probably within the next 6 months. I think that would be the safest way to put it at this point in time. But yeah, there's a lot of concern in terms of the whole AI rally thing. And if you're not holding a position from maybe a year or two ago in equities, if you try to look at Nvidia or whatever you want to buy, you have to be really careful. Now, I've said throughout 2025 that this is just a ticking time bomb. That quick V-shaped reversal in April, we didn't see market push down with the whole tariff issues and whatnot. This is just running up like crazy. And I'll be honest with you, the weighting on the NASDAQ here is actually not that fair. Because if we take a look at the equity markets in the US, and if we take a look at the futures market here, there are 7 companies that's called the Max 7 that's actually driving the market up. Not all the other stocks are actually doing that well. It's just that this 7 is really pushing it out. We now have 8 right now, right? So we got 8 because we're adding Broadcom to it right now. So instead of a magnificent 7, we're calling them the elite 8 at this point in time. So something is there. Now this is where it gets a little bit funky in terms of how the NASDAQ move. One of obviously the biggest concern is whether or not Nvidia is going to push higher, right? Which it has been. But if you take a look at the push with Nvidia here, it's not really there. You can take a look. I mean, all I need to do is just zoom out. And you can actually see the exhaustion here, right? Once it hits that all-time high, once it hits that 180 level, it's very hard for it to just shoot to 200. Because if the demand is so high, if Nvidia is doing so well, it would have just hit 200 at this point in time. But Jensen Huang has been putting a lot of caution here in terms of what the Chinese could actually be doing. And that's the reason why he actually went to China and tried to negotiate with the government there. But it's not doing that well. So we have a couple of things to look at. Now, if we take a look at China and where Nvidia stuffs are coming from, right? TSMC is a Taiwanese company. Jensen Huang was born in Taiwan. So the Chinese might look at that and say, hey, you know what? Why are we buying your stuff? Even though you're American, okay, if I buy from America, that's completely fine. We're not having that good of a relationship with America at this point in time. So why would I buy from an American company? Number two, behind all this is produced in Taiwan. We're not doing that well with Taiwan at this point in time either. In fact, there's a lot of fuss going on with whether or not China could actually start the stuff with Taiwan. I don't want to go there. But you'll take a look at that and think about it, right? And the Chinese AI companies are not doing that bad either. And this is a concern that Huang was having, that they're not too far behind from the technologies that they have. Now, the Chinese government has basically put a ban on NVIDIA this week, all right? And they have assigned the whole AI projects in terms of the processing, who's going to get to manufacture it. It's Huawei at this point in time, right? And they're basing their stuff on the H20 chips that NVIDIA sells. So it gets really deep. And this is where you have to be a little bit more careful in terms of whether or not NVIDIA is sustainable. And NVIDIA's decision to back OpenAI is actually not I wouldn't say it's actually the wisest decision at this point in time. In fact, it actually puts them at risk because we had this discussion, right, with the Indonesian channel guys. And, we discussed this. I said, look, if there's an AI crash, NVIDIA would actually be pretty safe. But because of what NVIDIA is investing into OpenAI is actually going to be the first one that I think has the biggest risk to kind of collapse. And that would drag Microsoft down with it. That because of that proposed investment, that would actually drag down NVIDIA as well. So this is actually pretty vulnerable at this point in time, because as long as you're not involved in the business and you just provide infrastructure, I think you're fine. Because the companies that are going to collapse on that AI crash is probably those companies that are paying too much for the infrastructure and then can't repay the whole thing. Okay? All right. So those are the stuff that was asked, right, in terms of NASDAQ Insight and whatnot. I say, it is a very risky proposition at this point in time. Okay. Yes, Tabelo, we understand that there's no NFE today, and we know that from the get-go. But we're just here on standby because the data is ready. We just don't know if it's actually going to get pushed out or anyone leaks it. But looking at the market, I don't think we're getting any reaction in the market. So and we don't have anything scheduled right now for next week as well. People are saying, it's going to be the 10th. No, it doesn't have to be on the 10th, because as I say, if the government opens on Monday and the BL says, you know what, we have it ready, here we go, we don't have to schedule it on the 10th, then they can release it. The data is ready. And one of the things that you need to keep an eye out for, because the data is ready, someone's going to leak it. So you have to be aware. I don't know if we're actually going to get a leak. For now, we don't have a leak. But CNN gets a report that BLS has the data. And I've been on the wire right now. I've been setting up alerts nonstop. If we get a leak or anything like that, then we might actually see a sudden move in the market. So keep an eye out on that. Just keep that in mind, that the data is actually done. I haven't seen a leak since 2010, 2011. I think it was the last time, it was about 2010, 2011. But yeah, never know, right? Maybe people say, hi, you know what? I don't get paid. I'm just going to lick it, Screw the market. Anything can go. All right. Anyway, we are quickly getting out of time. But yeah, as I said, it's not fair. I don't think I can explain to you about what all this stuff. But yeah, here's the code again. It's Nonfarm 2025. Again, we have a schedule for a theory session on the 10th. I think it is on the 10th. Just double check. Let me just double check. But yeah, I think it's currently scheduled on the 10th. It is scheduled for the 10th. And the NFP could actually be released on the 10th. Because we don't have it this week, we might have it next Friday. So definitely tune in next Friday. We might get that next Friday. If we do get that scheduled for next Friday, then we'll trade that NFP numbers next Friday. Okay? But just a heads up, with the CPI numbers, one of my colleagues here is actually going to take over on the 14th because I'm actually going to be away during the CPI release this month. So yeah, it's still gonna be there. You're still gonna be trading live CPI release, and Daryl's gonna take over. And Daryl's a good trader, so yeah, you might get something that's actually very different from me, but he's a good short-term intraday traders. That would probably be a little bit different to you guys. Okay. All right. Anyway. Any questions so far? If you have any questions, please let me know. And we still have a good 4 minutes to talk about stuff. Anyway, someone was actually asking, right, about the election tomorrow for Japan. So if you take a look at the Japanese yen right now, the dollar yen is still pushing down. And reason being is there was actually a couple of stuff that's been happening here. Obviously, we had that speech from Ueda this morning that, yeah, they're still going to go ahead with that interest rate hike, pending that, fundamental data doesn't shift in a major way or anything like that, and their economy is actually sustainable. Now, for now, it's sustainable. One of the biggest drivers is obviously the tourism industry. The tourism industry in this month in particular, it's going to get super busy in Japan as well as South Korea, because right now, if you don't know, the Chinese market is closed. They have the Golden Week, and it's basically a public holiday until, I believe it's until the 8th. But people are just going to take off until the 13th or anything like that. So expect a lot of incoming tourism to Japan and South Korea over the weekend, all right? That's still going to prop the economy up. I have no doubt. That's still going to push inflation up. And because it's still going to push inflation up, that's basically for a way to say, okay, we will do that rate hike sometimes this year. And basically that's what he said. They still tried to do that this year. And then the one thing that's holding it back is basically Japan right now doesn't have a leader because the prime minister is outgoing and they're going to have an election tomorrow to choose their next prime minister. I think we have 3 candidates. It's the same candidates as last year, but Japan right now, it's very different, right? It's leaning towards more of the right-wing activists there because they don't like that deal with India where people from India are coming in. And also a lot of these migrant workers are actually changing how they are doing their local cultures and whatnot. So there's actually a lot of pushback at this point in time. Leading party is LDP, which is the Liberal Democratic Party. That's basically have been the leading party for basically post-war Japan. This time around is actually going to shift a little bit. I think there's going to be a probability tomorrow, about 50% probability that LDP might not be the leading party. I think Sanseito might actually be there, but we're probably going to be looking at any leadership that has a good relationship with more of the right-wing side. And the only person that has that right now is actually Koizumi. Koizumi is the son of the previous prime minister in Japan, right? So 4th generation prime minister, if you want to put it that way. So a lot of pedigree on that, and Japanese like that. He might win it, and if he wins it, that's okay. Then I think the Japanese political field is likely going to stabilize, but anyone else that wins it, kind of changed a lot of the stuff out there. So we're probably going to be looking at a little bit more of an unstable political landscape in Japan. And that's basically what they want, right? Have you read the news about Japan 2 nanometer chip manufacturing? No, not yet, and we are out of time to discuss that. But yeah, we can discuss it next week, I guess. All right. But anyway, those are my view. Who's gonna win tomorrow? Obviously, we don't know, but I think it's a good idea to skip any yen crosses today. It's good to start fresh next week once we have that new prime minister in Japan. Okay, it's just gonna change the whole landscape there a lot more. Now, in terms of the dollar yen strength, I'm not too convinced that the dollar yen is super weak. The US dollar weakness at this point in time, it's really more engineered rather than anything else. So, a little bit unclear. Okay. Anyway, again, as I said, the next session is going to be Ethereum practice. That's going to be on the 10th. Because there might be a possibility that on the 10th, the NFP number is actually going to get released, and we might actually do the NFP live trade during that theory and practice sessions. Okay, so by the time we get to the examples and whatnot, we'll probably be trading the NFP numbers if it is going to be released on the 10th. But again, don't hold me on that. It's not scheduled or anything like that. The BLS can release it anytime when the market reopens. And if the market doesn't reopen next week, then obviously we don't have the NFP numbers again next week. So it really depends on what Trump does at this point in time. All right. Okay, then. If there are no further questions, then we'll wrap it up for these sessions. I know it's a super weird live trading sessions. But yeah, as I said, the last time this happened was January 2019. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys haven't even started trading back then. Okay, that was a year before COVID or anything. All right, guys, have a fantastic weekend ahead. Stay safe. Again, just be careful. Just be on the edge there. Market could snap at any given moment if the NFP data is actually leaked. I'm not saying there's a high probability of that, but I'm not saying it's zero probability that it could actually be leaked. So yeah, just be on the edge, okay? Stay safe, and I'll see you guys next week.